You might have noticed over the past few years, we've been seeing a return of fantasy as a genre. In the 80s through the early aughts, we saw loads of fantasy media, from the Lord of the Rings movies to Pottermania. However, this quickly faded as too many studios tried to cash in on the trend, and we got a slew of low-quality fantasy movies with such forgettable entries as the Aragon movie or Robert Zemeckis' Beowulf movie. We saw something similar in gaming as well, with dungeon crawlers and RPGs dominating the 90s and early aughts until the first-person shooter came to rule the mainstream. And while the trend lasted longer than it did in Hollywood, with games like Dragon Age and Skyrim still finding huge success in the early 2010s, they were more the last holdouts in a declining genre. While there were some notable releases during the 2010s, the fantasy RPG did not have the same prevalence it once did. That is, until the 2020s, where we have seen it return in a big way, with new entries in the Dragon Age and Baldur's Gate series, as well as a slew of indie and AA studios trying their hand in the genre. However, while there have been some big successes, like Baldur's Gate 3 and Tainted Grail, there have been many more that haven't managed to reach far above mediocrity. Even huge developers such as Obsidian or the once legendary BioWare have failed to impress with their recent forays into the fantasy genre. A lot of these games have had the same criticism leveled at them that the fantasy genre as a whole has received, namely a lack of innovation. For decades now, almost everything in the fantasy genre has drawn from the same small pool of inspiration, leading to worlds and stories that can start to feel very samey. Therefore, you can imagine my excitement when starting Clash: Artifacts of Chaos. I could instantly tell that this was anything but iterative. Developed by the endearingly deranged Chilean studio Ace Team, Clash is the newest entry in the Xenoclash series. You don't have to have played any of the previous entries to enjoy it, because even though it takes place in the same world, it takes place at a far different time, so there's no story context needed to enjoy Clash. But upon starting, the first thing you're going to notice is the aesthetic. In both graphical style and art direction, it is wholly unique, and uniquely bizarre. On the graphical side, the most striking thing is this cross-hatched look to all the textures, with boiling lines that add this surreal and dreamlike feeling to the whole world, giving it a subtle sense of motion and undulation even when everything is standing still. Combine that with the bright, saturated colors and the cel-shaded lighting, and you get an entirely unique look. I find this style to be incredibly gorgeous, and when paired with the bizarre art direction, it creates this wonderful storybook feeling to it all. I was struck at many points in my journey with the sheer majesty of my surroundings, from the massive mountains to the mushroom forests to the beautiful sunsets. There's a sense of wonder that is uncommon in many modern fantasy games, which often try for either the modern, gritty, dark fantasy look, or fall too far into the classic Tolkien-esque style, while either way ending up generic. The look makes sense when you hear one of the studio founders discuss influences and inspirations. In an interview with Carlos Bourdieu, one of the three brothers who founded Ace Team, describes their aesthetic as punk fantasy, inspired by the strange and surreal styles of 80s fantasy illustrators, with Clash having an especially strong inspiration from the works of John Blanche. Now, if you are a Warhammer nerd like myself, then that name should immediately excite you, as Blanche's strange and striking style was one of the founding aesthetics for the early days of Warhammer, with his art serving as the foundation for many of its most iconic armies today. You can see this inspiration most strongly in Clash's character designs, where in the many strange denizens of Xenozoic, you see Blanche's signature surreal and off-kilter sensibilities coming through. The lack of symmetry, the love of loud patterns and saturated colors, the impractical and surreal costuming, it all breathes such a sense of life into this world. Instead of feeling like you're in another Tolkien-esque land of the same mountains, elves, and dragons, you are thrust into something truly alien, bringing back the sense of wonder and discovery that the fantasy genre needs. It makes the simple act of exploring this world so exciting that you just can't wait to see what bizarre and beautiful sight waits around each corner. I also think that Blanche's art inspired the boiling lines and cross-hatched look of the game, as this wiggling world exudes the same level of energy as his expressive and messy style. It's a good thing that Clash's world is so exciting to explore, because exploration is probably the biggest part of this game, and its tale will take you to every corner of Xenozoic, from the bright pastoral scenes of the Karoo Crags to the cold bleakness of the Zenetic Mountains, to the beautiful hues of the sunset ruins of the Amaquali. Ace Team has done a great job of making each zone feel different and intriguing. When you combine these gorgeous sights with the soundtrack, sung in a language created for the game by Patricio Meneses, who has created all of the music for Ace Team's games, you fall under the spell of the truly unforgettable atmosphere that Clash provides. The haunting melodies and driving beats with the ghostly vocals all combine to give you a sense of both wonder and gravitas to your journey. There were many times where this combination of music and visuals was so striking that I completely forgot about my objective and just got lost wandering around these beautiful environments listening to this amazing music. It gives the game a genuine feeling of adventure that reminded me of my first times playing Skyrim or Dark Souls, where they had these mysterious worlds that felt like there could be anything hiding around each corner. However, I said the exploration was only part of this game, so what's the other part? Well, if you've played a Xenoclash game before, then you already know, but for the rest of you, it's combat. Specifically, hand-to-hand combat. While I wholeheartedly recommend this game, I think the combat is what will take the most getting used to if you decide to try it yourself. The main issue here is not that the combat is bad, but that the game doesn't do a great job of explaining how it works. So while the combat system is genuinely incredible once you get the hang of it, there will be some growing pains along the way. When I saw dodge rolls, a stamina system, and telegraphed enemy attacks, my first thought was to play this like Dark Souls, but I quickly found that to be a mistake. It felt like I was doing no damage, and trying to dodge enemy attacks felt clunky because of how you get locked into animations and how short the dodge actually was. Then, I found it had a parry system, and that you could parry basically anything, so naturally, I started trying to play it like Sekiro. But not all attacks have enough of a telegraph to parry on reaction, and parrying doesn't do any damage, so that clearly didn't work either. Then finally, I stopped trying to interpret this game through the lens of other games, and instead tried to figure it out on its own terms, and that was the key. So, to hopefully save some of you from the early game struggles I had, this is how the combat is actually meant to be used. The main mechanic for this combat system is animation cancelling. Just like a fighting game, with good timing, you can cancel most attacks into other attacks or actions. You can cancel normals into specials, or cancel normals into dodges. This is the key, because the game is similar to a fighting game, where it's all about positioning and combos. While the dodge does give iframes, it doesn't give a ton of them, so it's tricky to use. But if you're able to use a lot of them in a row by continually attacking, dodging, then attacking and cancelling again, you can actually cover a lot of ground, and often quite literally dance around the enemy and stay out of their range or continually force them to readjust. The only limit is that you cannot dodge cancel into the same move twice in a row, meaning you have to get comfortable with all the moves in your arsenal so that you'll know which ones to chain together to get the most value out of your combos. Also, while the parry is super useful, you only want to use it in moments where you're 100% sure you know what is coming. So look out for the enemy's most telegraphed move in the moveset, and then try to parry it every time they use it. You'll see that while the parry doesn't do any direct damage, it charges up the final aspect of combat, and the weirdest one, first person mode. Once your punch meter is full, you get to transition to first person, and more importantly, isolate one enemy into a one-on-one duel. This mode is also very unintuitive, as it shortens your dash even further and removes your animation canceling abilities. So at first, I didn't understand why you would ever use it, but throughout the game, I realized it's actually the most powerful tool in the game. When you land enough hits in first person mode, it triggers a crazy finisher, either fully KOing the enemy or dealing a significant chunk of damage to them. The best way to achieve this is to play extremely defensively while it's active, because with your diminished dodge, you have to use spacing a lot more carefully, running in and out of range and punishing any whiffed moves, slowly building up to that finisher. In first person mode, you also have improved stagger and faster punches, so when you have an opening, it's usually a lot easier to capitalize on it than in regular combat. Once you get a hang of this game's bizarre flow of the almost rhythm-based animation cancels, finding your own personal favorite combo of moves to dance in and out of range and looking for exploitable attacks to parry before charging up first-person mode to finish off enemies, Clash becomes incredible. What felt clunky and unintuitive at first became one of the most free-flowing and player expression-filled combat systems I've come across. There are tons of stances to choose, each with different combos and speeds, weapons to further enhance your damage and add even more moves to combine with your chosen loadout of 2 stances and 3 different special moves. It all means that you can really create your own personalized combat loop, swapping between stances, weapons, and specials in a wonderfully fluid system that's just a joy to pilot. Then to cap it all off, the game has one of the most bizarre but compelling additions to combat I've ever played. Anytime you encounter a sentient creature, you can choose to challenge them to the ritual before you fight them. Being inspired by the dice-based outcomes of old-school choose-your-own-adventure books, you get to play a game of chance and strategy against your opponent before the fight starts to give one side a bonus during the fight. And these aren't just simple things like getting a damage boost. These are wild and completely game-changing additions, like summoning in an ally or having the opponent swarmed with bees. And if you lose, these conditions can be thrown right back at you. While it does come down to dice rolls, there is enough strategy with how you use your chocks that it makes for a surprisingly satisfying little minigame before combat. And while completely optional, I found myself participating in it every time. Much like Gwent in The Witcher, you can also purchase new chocks and dice from the merchants and get into your own deck building as well. This is just one example of the greater strength this game has in world building. It is so committed to just being bizarre, strange, and unpredictable that it always had me excited to see what new stuff would show up in each area. The game manages to strike that weird balance that you see in something like Dorohedoro, where things just happen and you are forced to simply go with it. But after a while, it starts to make some strange kind of sense. And no matter how unusual the new world additions become, they somehow join together to make this patchwork world feel coherent. The final key to making this journey so enjoyable is the writing and voice acting. For a game made by a small team, this game has some truly incredible voice acting. It's a personal favorite gag of mine when a story has visually bizarre characters who just have normal voices. And in a move that might come as a surprise based on my earlier descriptions, this game has extremely normal voices for all of its characters.
I have another artifact. You don't want to end up like the old man.
I don't have any dice.
Then I've already won. I get to hit you first.
One of those sentences is true.
Once again, this somehow adds to the believability of this bizarre world, because no matter how weird it seems to us, to them, it's just life. This impression is helped because these are likable characters, and while we've seen the old grumpy dude has to take care of young child and becomes a better person story for centuries, I found this still managed to be a fun take on it. Pseudo isn't ever actually a bad person, and he never tries to do the old, I'm too stoic to take care of this child because I'm just that macho thing either. Instead, he openly cares from the moment he meets the boy, and his change is far more about him realizing how much this relationship means to him rather than how much it means to the boy. You totally believe in this relationship, and the ambient dialogue between them that you get while exploring the world is extremely charming.
Pseudo, when you were small, did you have feathers?
No.
Why not?
Why would I have feathers?
Because they're soft, and you're so bald.
Hey, you little cack. I was born this way.
You said cat.
I found myself deeply invested in the two of them by the end. The only real weak link in this story is the ending. I won't spoil it, as I hope that some of you might actually go and play this game, but while it did almost make me cry, it also didn't really make sense and feels rather abrupt. This isn't helped by the only poor voice performance in the game showing up with a very plot-significant character right near the end. I know that the character is important to the Xenoclash games, so they couldn't recast him, but the more amateurish vocal performance really stands out when compared to the otherwise fantastic work in the rest of the cast. So what about jank? The one thing people worry about when they hear indie fantasy RPG is the level of polish. Even AAA RPGs are subject to a lot of jank, and the indie ones often have even more. Therefore, you might be surprised to hear that this game is shockingly well polished. In my entire 19-hour playthrough, where I 100%ed the whole game, I can count on one hand the number of bugs I experienced. I had a boss throw me out of a boss arena with a grab attack. I managed to initiate a fight through a wall, and occasionally in the final area, the climbing would take a couple tries to get Pseudo to actually climb up a ledge. However, on the scale of indie RPGs, these were all extremely minor, and I was impressed by just how seamless and smooth the experience was start to finish. I do, however, have one major technical complaint for the game. Clash has easily the worst implemented TAA I have ever seen. What's so crazy is that it gets worse the higher the setting is, with Maximum having this insane motion blur ghosting added to almost everything in the game, which just looks horrible. Now you might be saying, why not just turn this off then? Well, the problem is that the awesome boiling lines effect is also tied to the TAA for some unknown reason. So if you put it below high, it disables the effect. I'm sure this is all some technical limit of the engine, but it's really annoying. My best advice is to put it at high and try your best not to go looking for it. It's not as bad as Maximum, but if you do look for it, it's still pretty noticeable. It's unfortunate that such a fantastic and unique art style has to have such an annoying technical limitation. Regardless, I would say that all of this pales in comparison to what is on offer here. This is easily one of the most memorable experiences I've had in a game in years. Everything from the world to the music to the characters will stick with me far longer than any bugs or minor graphics gripes will. And I think it's almost criminal how little attention this game has gotten. While the reviews are good, at the time of writing, it has less than 1,000, and as Carlos Bourdieu said in an interview, I would say the game is certainly risky, as almost all our titles have been in the past. And in a world where games like Avowed and Starfield get lambasted for their lack of innovation, I think we should support the devs who are actually willing to take those risks and make a world this strange, beautiful, and enchanting. So please, take a chance on this truly hidden gem of a game. Alright, well, I never actually planned on making a video on this game. I was just playing it for fun, but then I was so charmed by it, I just felt the need to recommend it to anyone I could. So that's where this video came from. And also, as you guys have probably noticed in my videos, I like making these 3D backgrounds where I can put my little Raven guy to talk about games. And I can say that it's a credit to this game's art style. This one was really hard to make, and I still don't think I even got that close to matching the game's style. So I don't know what kind of wizardry they were putting on their shaders. Also, while I'm here, I'd like to take a couple of small moments to add some corrections to my previous videos. One of them is in the Fear video when talking about the story. I called the times when Alma would possess Paxton a convergence event. That is actually from Dead Space. What it's called in the game is a synchronicity event. So Guess I just had dead space on the brain while I was writing that. And the second thing is a couple of small details for the Trials video. The first one is, there is actually some madman in the community that's made a community patch that fixes the game's launching issues and its crashing issues. It also made the Steam achievements work for me. I made a community post a couple of days ago where you can find some more info on that. But shout out to that guy, truly incredible work. And finally, you can actually disable ghosts in Trials Rising to get way better load times. It's a setting called Single Player Ghosts you can find in the gameplay settings in the options menu. My bad. But I hope you guys all are having a great week, and I will see you next time.